A cowboy with a broken rib tried to saddle his horse, but every breath felt like knives tearing through his chest. Just when he thought he'd collapse in the dirt, a woman's voice cut through the pain. She took the reins from his trembling hands, and in that moment, everything changed. This is the story of Cole Maddox and Riley Monroe, two stubborn souls in 1878 Washington Territory, who found love when neither was looking for it. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty yard behind McKinnon's livery in Spokane Falls, Washington Territory. Cole Maddox stood beside his restless bay stallion, Jupiter, one hand pressed firmly against his left side, where the bandages wrapped tight around his torso did little to dull the fire burning beneath his ribs. Every shallow breath sent a sharp reminder of just how badly things had gone 3 days ago when he'd confronted those cattle rustlers in the foothills. The bullet had grazed him, that's what Doc Patterson called it anyway, but the impact had cracked his fifth rib clean through. Doc said he was lucky. Lucky the bullet hadn't gone deeper. Lucky he'd made it back to town before infection set in. Lucky to be alive. Cole didn't feel lucky. He felt like a damn fool. "Easy now, Jupe," he muttered through gritted teeth as the stallion shifted sideways, ears flicking nervously. The horse sensed his weakness. Animals always did. Cole reached for the saddle he'd draped over the hitching rail earlier, his right hand closing around the horn, while his left arm hung useless at his side. The saddle probably weighed 40 pounds. Might as well have been 400. He lifted it 6 inches before the movement sent a lightning bolt of agony through his torso. His vision blurred white at the edges. The saddle slipped from his grip and hit the dirt with a heavy thud that made Jupiter dance backward, pulling the lead rope taut. "Son of a..." Cole's curse dissolved into a hiss of pain as he doubled over, one hand braced against the rail, the other clutching his side. Sweat broke out across his forehead despite the cooling autumn air. His hat tumbled off, landing beside the saddle in the dust. This was ridiculous. He'd been saddling horses since he was 6 years old, 24 years of ranching, and now he couldn't manage the simplest task without nearly passing out like some greenhorn fresh off the train from Boston. "You planning to stand there bleeding through that shirt, or are you going to accept help when it's offered?" The voice came from behind him, calm, clear, and unmistakably female. Cole straightened slowly, biting back another curse as the movement pulled at his injured side. He turned to find a woman standing about 10 feet away, arms crossed over the front of a simple brown riding dress that had seen its share of hard use. She wore no bonnet, just a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face, and her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung over one shoulder. He'd never seen her before. He was certain of that. In a town the size of Spokane Falls, you knew every face, and hers wasn't one a man would forget. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with delicate features or fancy clothes. Her face was sun-touched, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. But it was her eyes that held him, sharp, assessing, the color of winter sky. They studied him with the same careful attention a horse trader might give a questionable mare. "I'm fine," Cole said automatically, though even he didn't believe it. "No, you're not." She moved forward with the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. "You're about 30 seconds from face-planting in the dirt, and that horse of yours is getting more nervous by the minute. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down on that bench over there, and I'm going to saddle your animal so you can get wherever you're trying to go." Cole bristled. "Ma'am, I appreciate the concern, but nothing." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't tall, probably came up to his shoulder, but something in her bearing made her seem bigger. "I've been watching you struggle with that saddle for the last 5 minutes. You're injured, you're in pain, and you're too stubborn to admit you need help. Does that about sum it up?" His first instinct was to tell her exactly where she could take her help. Cole Maddox didn't need assistance from anyone, let alone a woman he'd never met who was currently looking at him like he was a particularly difficult math problem she was determined to solve. But then another wave of pain rolled through him, stealing his breath and making his knees go soft. His vision tunneled again, and he felt himself swaying. A firm hand gripped his upper arm, steadying him. "That's what I thought. Come on, cowboy. Bench! Now!" She guided him the 6 steps to the weathered wooden bench that sat against the livery wall, and Cole found himself sitting before he'd consciously decided to cooperate. He leaned back against the sun-warmed boards, breathing carefully through his nose, trying to will the world to stop spinning. Through half-closed eyes, he watched her pick up his hat, dust it off with 2 efficient swipes, and set it on the bench beside him. Then she retrieved his saddle as if it weighed nothing at all, hoisting it onto her hip with practiced ease. "What's his name?" she asked, approaching Jupiter with slow, deliberate steps. "Jupiter," Cole managed. "Jupe. But ma'am, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to." She stopped a few feet from the horse, letting him catch her scent and settle. Jupiter's ears swiveled forward, his nostrils flaring as he assessed this new human. "But I'm going to anyway, because watching you suffer through your own stubbornness isn't high on my list of enjoyable activities." She held out one hand, palm up, and made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. Jupiter stretched his neck, his velvet nose brushing her fingers. After a moment's consideration, he took a step closer. "That's a good boy," she murmured, her voice dropping to that particular tone people used with animals, gentle but confident. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Your person there is having a rough day, but we're going to help him out, aren't we?" Cole watched in amazement as his notoriously temperamental stallion, the horse that bit the last stable hand who'd tried to handle him, stood perfectly still while this strange woman ran her hand down his neck, checked his feet, and examined his tack with the thoroughness of an experienced horsewoman. "When did you last have his hooves trimmed?" she called over her shoulder. 2 weeks ago, Cole replied automatically. "Why?" "Just checking. He's favoring his left front slightly. Might want to have the farrier take another look." She lifted the saddle pad from the rail, gave it a shake to remove any debris, and laid it carefully across Jupiter's back, positioning it just behind the withers exactly where it should sit. Cole wanted to protest again, wanted to tell her he could manage his own damn horse. But the words died in his throat as he watched her work. There was something almost mesmerizing about her movements. Efficient, confident, with no wasted motion. She knew exactly what she was doing. The saddle came next, lifted and settled with a precision that spoke of years of practice. She adjusted the position slightly, making sure the pad wasn't bunched underneath, then moved to the near side to reach under Jupiter's belly for the cinch. "This is the part where most horses try to puff up," she said conversationally, drawing the cinch up in stages rather than yanking it tight all at once. "But you're too smart for that, aren't you, Jupe?" The stallion stood like a statue, occasionally turning his head to watch her with one dark eye, but making no move to dance away or bite. "Who are you?" Cole asked, because he couldn't help himself. This woman had appeared out of nowhere, taken over his task with barely a by your leave, and was currently doing a better job of handling his horse than most cowboys he'd worked with. She glanced at him, and he caught what might have been the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Riley Monroe. I bought the supply store last month, Clark's place, down on Main Street, though I suppose it's Monroe's place now." The name rang a bell. He'd heard talk at the saloon about some newcomer who'd bought out old Henry Clark when he decided to retire to California to live with his daughter. There'd been some grumbling from the men about a woman running a business, but most folks seemed willing to give her a chance as long as the store stayed well stocked. "You're the new storekeeper," Cole said. Among other things, Riley finished with the cinch and moved to check the breast collar and back cinch, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I'm also passably good with horses, moderately skilled at basic veterinary work, and apparently constitutionally incapable of walking past someone who needs help." "I didn't ask for help." "No, you didn't. Men like you never do." She came around Jupiter's head to check the bridle, though the horse was only wearing a simple halter with lead rope attached. "Planning to ride out with just a halter?" "Bridle's in my saddlebag. Figured I'd switch it once I was mounted." Riley raised an eyebrow. "With a cracked rib and one functioning arm? That's optimistic." Before he could respond, she'd retrieved the bridle from his saddlebag and was efficiently switching out the tack. Jupiter accepted the bit without fuss, standing perfectly still as she buckled the throat latch and adjusted the noseband. "There." She stepped back, giving the horse one final assessment before turning to face Cole. "He's ready. Question is, are you?" Cole pushed himself to his feet, moving slowly to avoid any sudden jolts to his injured side. The few minutes of rest had helped. The worst of the pain had dulled from a scream to a persistent, angry throb. "I'll manage." I'm sure you will. Riley gathered Jupiter's reins and led him over to the bench, positioning the horse's left side directly in front of where Cole stood. But you're going to mount from this bench instead of the ground. Less strain on that rib. It galled him to admit she was right, but she was. Cole stepped up onto the bench, which brought him level with the stirrup. Taking a deep breath and instantly regretting it, he gripped the saddle horn with his right hand and managed to get his left foot in the stirrup. The actual mount was ugly, more of a desperate scramble than the smooth swing he usually managed, but he made it into the saddle without passing out or falling off. Small victories. From Jupiter's back, he looked down at Riley Monroe, who stood with one hand resting on the horse's shoulder, her face tilted up toward his. This close, he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the dusting of freckles across her nose that spoke of hours spent in the sun. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. "I'm Cole Maddox. I run a spread about 8 miles north of here." "I know who you are." At his surprised look, she shrugged. "Small town. People talk. The general consensus seems to be that you're honest, hardworking, keep to yourself, and have been alone too long." Cole felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with pain or exertion. People should mind their own business. Probably, but they don't. Riley stepped back, giving Jupiter room to move. "You should see Doc Patterson again tomorrow. That bandage needs changing, and I'd bet money you've got inflammation starting. Cracked ribs are nothing to ignore." "You a doctor too?" "No, but I've patched up enough injuries to know when someone's being stupid about their own health." She fixed him with a level stare. "Don't be stupid, Mr. Maddox." Before he could formulate a response to that, something between offended and amused, she turned and walked toward the front of the livery, her braid swinging between her shoulder blades. Cole sat there for a moment, watching her go, trying to figure out what had just happened. He'd come to town to pick up supplies and collect his horse. Instead, he'd been rescued, scolded, and efficiently managed by a woman who apparently had no qualms about telling a grown man what to do. The strangest part was that he didn't entirely mind. Jupiter shifted beneath him, ready to move. Cole gathered the reins, adjusted his seat as carefully as he could, and urged the stallion forward. As they passed the front of the livery and turned onto Main Street, he caught sight of Riley Monroe entering a building 3 doors down, the old Clark's Supply Store, now bearing a freshly painted sign that read, "Monroe's Goods and Provisions." Through the window, he saw her greet a customer, her face transforming with a smile that was nothing like the determined expression she'd worn in the livery yard. She looked younger when she smiled. Warmer. Cole shook his head and turned Jupiter north toward home. He had work to do, cattle to check, fence line to inspect, a dozen other tasks that wouldn't wait for a man with a cracked rib to heal properly. But as he rode through the outskirts of Spokane Falls, where the buildings gave way to open grassland and the road became a dirt track leading into the hills, he found his thoughts drifting back to sharp blue eyes and capable hands, to a woman who'd appeared exactly when he'd needed help and hadn't taken no for an answer. He'd thank her properly next time he was in town. Maybe pick up some supplies from her store, even though he'd just stocked up last week. It was the polite thing to do. That's what he told himself, anyway. The ride home took 2 hours that felt like 6. Every step Jupiter took sent jarring impacts through Cole's body, and by the time his ranch house came into view, a modest 2-room cabin with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings scattered across a cleared section of land, he was gritting his teeth so hard his jaw ached. He managed to unsaddle Jupiter without dropping anything or passing out, though it was a near thing. The stallion was settled in his stall with fresh hay and water before Cole finally allowed himself to stumble into the house. The cabin was dark and quiet, the way it always was. Just him and the sound of settling wood, the creak of the door, the whisper of wind through the chinks in the walls he kept meaning to fill. He'd built this place 6 years ago, after he'd saved enough money to buy the land and start his own herd. It was supposed to be temporary, something to get him started until he could build a real house. Somehow, 6 years had passed, and he was still in this same cabin, still alone, still telling himself that next year would be different. Cole lit a lamp with shaking hands, the match taking 3 tries to strike. The weak light pushed back the shadows, but made the emptiness more pronounced. He should eat something. Doc Patterson had been clear about that. Injured bodies needed fuel to heal. Instead, he collapsed onto his bed without even removing his boots, one arm thrown across his eyes, and let the darkness take him. He dreamed of competent hands and winter sky eyes, of a voice that didn't coddle or condescend, of a woman who'd looked at his stubbornness and met it with her own. The next 3 days passed in a haze of pain and frustration. Cole did the bare minimum required to keep his animals alive, fed the horses, checked the cattle, made sure everyone had water, but anything more strenuous left him sweating and dizzy. He didn't go back to town, didn't see Doc Patterson, told himself he was fine, even as the ache in his side deepened and his energy drained away like water through a sieve. On the 4th day, he woke to find blood seeping through his bandages. That was enough to penetrate even his stubbornness. He saddled Jupiter with gritted teeth and dogged determination and pointed the stallion's nose toward Spokane Falls. The ride was a nightmare. Cole spent most of it hunched over Jupiter's neck, focusing on staying conscious and upright. The world contracted to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the leather of the reins in his hand, the too-fast pounding of his own heart. He made it to Main Street before the blackness at the edges of his vision finally won. The last thing he remembered was sliding sideways in the saddle, Jupiter's nervous whinny, and the hard impact of the ground rushing up to meet him. Then nothing. Kasunk. Consciousness returned in fragments. Soft fabric beneath his cheek, the smell of lavender and soap, a cool cloth pressed against his forehead, voices low and urgent floating somewhere above him. Complete fool, that's what he is. I told him to see Doc Patterson 3 days ago. Easy, Riley, he's coming around. Cole forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly, wooden rafters overhead, morning sunlight streaming through a window, the concerned face of Doc Patterson leaning over him. There you are, the doctor said, relief evident in his voice. Gave us quite a scare, Mr. Maddox. You've been out for about 20 minutes. Cole tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. A hand, small but firm, pressed against his shoulder, keeping him down. Don't even think about it. Riley Monroe's voice came from his other side. You're not going anywhere until Doc says you're stable. He turned his head and found her sitting beside what he now recognized as a cot in a small back room. She'd pulled a chair close, and there was a basin of water on the floor beside her, a blood-stained cloth draped over its edge. What happened? His voice came out rough, his throat dry. You fell off your horse in the middle of Main Street, Riley said flatly. Scared the hell out of Jupiter and half the town. Fortunately, I was outside my store when it happened, so I managed to catch your horse before he bolted and got you inside. You carried me. Cole looked from her to the doctor, confused. I had help, Riley admitted. But yes, mostly me. You're not as heavy as you look. Doc Patterson cleared his throat. Mr. Maddox, your wound is infected. Not badly yet, but getting there. You reopened the injury site with your activities, and combined with inadequate rest and what I suspect is minimal food intake, your body simply couldn't cope anymore. I've been fine. You've been an idiot, Riley interrupted. And before you get defensive, those are Doc's words, not mine, though I happen to agree with them. Despite everything, the pain, the embarrassment, the frustration at his own weakness, Cole felt his lips twitch. Tell me how you really feel. You want the truth? Fine. Riley leaned forward, her eyes blazing with an intensity that pinned him in place more effectively than her hand on his shoulder had. You're one of those men who thinks asking for help is some kind of moral failing, who'd rather suffer alone than admit he needs support, who believes his worth is measured by how much he can endure without complaint. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter but no less fierce. And I understand that. I do. This territory breeds a certain kind of independence. It has to, because survival often depends on it. But Cole Maddox, there's a difference between independence and self-destruction. What you've been doing this past week, that's the latter. Cole stared at her, speechless. No one had talked to him like that in years. Maybe ever. Most people in Spokane Falls treated him with a kind of distant respect, acknowledged his presence, conducted business when necessary, but never pushed, never challenged, never got close enough to see beneath the surface. Riley Monroe had known him for less than a week, and she was looking at him like she could read every thought he'd ever tried to hide. I'm going to give you something for the infection, Doc Patterson said, breaking the tension. And you're going to stay here for at least 2 hours so I can monitor your condition. After that, you're not going home. You're staying at the boarding house in town for the next 3 days minimum. Mrs. Fletcher has been informed and has a room ready. I can't. You can, and you will, the doctor said firmly. Your animals will be fine for a few days. I've already sent word to young Thomas Miller. He'll ride out to your place this afternoon and handle the feeding and watering. Consider it doctor's orders. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was fine, that he could manage on his own, that he didn't need anyone's charity or concern. But Riley was still watching him with those sharp blue eyes, and he found he didn't have the strength to fight both her and Doc Patterson. Not right now. Maybe not ever. Fine, he said quietly. 3 days. Good. Doc Patterson stood, gathering his supplies. I'll be back to check on you in an hour. Riley, can you stay with him? I don't want him trying to leave before I get back. I'll make sure he behaves, Riley promised. The doctor left, and silence settled over the small room. Outside, Cole could hear the sounds of the town going about its business, horses clopping past, conversations floating through the window, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. I'm sorry, he said finally. Riley raised an eyebrow. For what specifically? There's quite a list to choose from. Despite everything, Cole felt a smile tug at his mouth. For being stupid, for not listening, for scaring your customers when I fell off my horse in front of your store. Apology accepted. Riley reached for the basin, wringing out the cloth and folding it neatly. Though, if we're being honest, you probably did more damage to your own pride than anyone else's sensibilities. That's certainly true. Cole studied her face, noting the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Have you been here the whole time, since I fell? Most of it. I needed to make sure you were okay. She set the basin aside and met his gaze. You helped me out once, even if you don't remember it. Cole frowned. What do you mean? 2 weeks ago. I just arrived in town, didn't know anyone, and was trying to negotiate a fair price on a wagon from Bill Henderson at the trading post. He was trying to charge me double what it was worth, assuming I wouldn't know the difference. Riley's expression softened slightly. You were there picking up supplies. You didn't say much, just casually mentioned that you'd seen the same model wagon go for half that price at the auction in Cheney. Henderson backed down immediately. Cole had a vague memory of the incident. He'd been in a hurry that day, eager to get back to the ranch, and hadn't paid much attention to the woman Henderson had been trying to cheat. He certainly hadn't expected her to remember. That was nothing, he said. It was something to me. Riley stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. I don't forget kindnesses, Mr. Maddox, even small ones. Especially small ones, because those are the kind people do when they don't expect anything in return. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. I need to get back to the store. I have a delivery arriving this afternoon, but I'll check on you tonight at the boarding house. Make sure you're actually resting instead of planning your escape. You don't have to do that. I know. Riley looked at him over her shoulder, and this time her smile was genuine, warm and bright and completely unexpected. But I'm going to anyway. Get some rest, Cowboy. You look like hell. Then she was gone, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts, his pain, and the lingering scent of lavender that somehow made the sterile back room of Doc Patterson's office feel a little less empty. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to the same puzzle. Who was Riley Monroe, really? And why did it feel like she'd walked into his life at exactly the moment everything was about to change? The boarding house room smelled of old wood and lye soap, with a faint undertone of the lavender sachets Mrs. Fletcher tucked into every pillowcase. Cole spent the first day mostly sleeping, waking only when the landlady knocked to bring him broth, or when Doc Patterson stopped by to check his bandages and mutter disapprovingly about stubborn ranchers who didn't know when to quit. Riley came that evening, as promised. She didn't knock, just opened the door and walked in like she had every right to be there, carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread and something savory that made Cole's stomach clench with sudden hunger. You look better, she said, setting the basket on the small table by the window. Less like a corpse, anyway. Your bedside manner needs work, Cole replied, but there was no heat in it. He'd managed to sit up against the headboard without his vision swimming, which felt like a significant victory. I'm not a nurse. I'm a storekeeper who happens to be checking on a customer. Riley pulled out the contents of the basket. Bread still warm from the oven, a jar of beef stew, 2 apples, and a small crock of butter. Mrs. Fletcher mentioned you weren't eating much. Figured you might need incentive. You made this? Don't sound so surprised. I'm capable of more than just saddling horses. She found a bowl and spoon in the room's modest furnishings and ladled out a generous portion of stew. Eat, and don't argue. Cole ate. The stew was good, better than good actually, rich and thick, with tender chunks of beef and vegetables that had been cooked long enough to become soft without turning to mush. He tried to eat slowly, but hunger won out and he found himself scraping the bottom of the bowl embarrassingly fast. Riley watched him with what might have been satisfaction. There's more if you want it. I shouldn't, but you will. She refilled his bowl without waiting for permission. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. Don't think I didn't notice when I helped carry you inside. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable silence as Cole ate his second helping. Riley settled into the room's only chair, her hands busy with some kind of needlework she'd pulled from her pocket. Mending, he realized, a torn shirt cuff that she worked on with the same efficient precision she'd shown with everything else. Can I ask you something? Cole said finally, setting aside the empty bowl. You can ask. Whether I answer depends on the question. Why Spokane Falls? It's not exactly the easiest place to make a living, especially for someone running a business alone. Riley was quiet for a moment, her needle continuing its steady rhythm. I needed a fresh start. Somewhere far enough from my past that it couldn't follow me, but not so remote that I'd be completely isolated. She glanced up, meeting his eyes. Plus, Henry Clark's store was well established and reasonably priced. The opportunity made sense. Where are you from originally? Oregon, small town outside Portland. Her expression closed slightly, making it clear that particular line of inquiry was finished. What about you? Were you born in Washington Territory? Cole shook his head. Montana, originally. Came west after... He stopped, surprised at how close he'd come to telling her things he never talked about. After circumstances changed, figured I'd try my luck at ranching. And how's that working out for you? Well, I'm currently sitting in a boarding house with a cracked rib and an infection, so I'd say it's been better. He smiled to take the edge off the words. But the ranch is doing well enough. I've got about 300 head of cattle, decent grazing land, water access. Could be worse. Could also be better, I'm guessing. Riley tied off her thread and examined her work with a critical eye. From what I hear, you run that place entirely by yourself. That's a lot for one man to manage. I've thought about hiring help, Cole admitted. But good ranch hands are hard to find, and the ones worth hiring usually want more pay than I can afford to offer right now. So you work yourself half to death trying to do everything alone. Riley folded the mended shirt and tucked it back into her pocket. Seems to be a pattern with you. Before Cole could respond to that uncomfortably accurate observation, someone knocked on the door. Riley stood to answer it, revealing Mrs. Fletcher with an armload of fresh linens and a concerned expression. Just checking to make sure everything's all right, the landlady said, her eyes darting between Riley and Cole with obvious curiosity. Do you need anything, Mr. Maddox? More water? Extra blankets? I'm fine, Mrs. Fletcher, thank you. Miss Monroe, will you be staying much longer? Not that there's anything improper about it, of course, given Mr. Maddox's condition, but people do talk. I was just leaving, Riley said smoothly, gathering her basket. She turned back to Cole. I'll check on you tomorrow. Try not to do anything stupid between now and then. I'll do my best. After both women had left, Mrs. Fletcher still radiating curiosity like a wood stove radiating heat, Cole lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. The food had helped, and the infection seemed to be responding to Doc Patterson's treatment, but it wasn't physical recovery that occupied his thoughts as darkness fell outside his window. It was the puzzle of Riley Monroe. The way she moved through the world with such confidence, as if she'd never doubted her right to occupy space or speak her mind. The casual competence she brought to everything from saddling horses to making stew to managing busybody landladies. The shadows he'd glimpsed behind her eyes when he'd asked about Oregon. She was hiding something, running from something, most likely, though whether it was a person or a memory or just the weight of her own past, he couldn't say. Cole recognized the impulse because he carried his own ghosts, the ones that woke him at 3 in the morning, The ones that made this empty cabin and solitary life feel less like a choice and more like a penance. Maybe that was why her presence didn't feel like an intrusion. Two people running from their pasts had an unspoken understanding. The next 2 days passed in a similar pattern. Doc Patterson came morning and evening to change bandages and pronounce gradual improvement. Mrs. Fletcher brought meals and gossip in equal measure. And Riley appeared each evening with food, conversation, and a complete refusal to be anything other than exactly herself. On the third evening, she arrived earlier than usual, her expression troubled. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble, settling into her usual chair. "And I need you to hear me out before you say no." Cole sat up straighter, suddenly wary. "All right. I've been thinking about expanding my delivery service, taking supplies out to the homesteads and smaller ranches that are too far from town for people to come in regularly. It would be good for business, and there's clearly a need for it." "Makes sense," Cole agreed cautiously. "The problem is, I don't know the area well enough yet. I'd need someone to show me where the different properties are, make introductions to the families, help me establish routes and relationships." Riley leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'd pay for your time. And in exchange, I could help you with some of your ranch work while we were out there. I wasn't joking when I said I'm good with cattle." Cole blinked. "You want to hire me as a guide?" "More like a temporary partnership. You need help moving your herd before the creek dries up. I heard you talking to Doc Patterson about it yesterday. I need help establishing my delivery routes. We could help each other." It was a practical proposal, almost too practical, which made Cole suspicious of his own eager response to it. "When would we start?" "As soon as Doc Patterson clears you for riding, probably another few days." Riley watched him carefully. "I know it's not what you're used to, working with a woman, accepting help when you'd rather handle everything yourself. If you'd rather not, I'll understand." Cole thought about his ranch, about the fence line that needed mending, and the cattle that needed moving to higher pasture before summer heat baked the lower creek beds dry. He thought about doing all of that alone, with ribs that still pulled and protested with every deep breath. Then he thought about Riley's hands on Jupiter's bridle, calm and sure, about the way she'd looked at him in the livery and seen past his stubbornness to the need underneath. "How long would this partnership last?" he asked. 2 weeks? Maybe 3? Depends on how much ground we need to cover and how quickly we can move. And you're sure you can handle the work? It won't be easy. Long days in the saddle, rough terrain, unpredictable weather." Riley's expression went flat. "Mr. Maddox, I grew up on a ranch. I can ride, rope, brand, and doctor cattle as well as most men and better than some. I've delivered calves in the middle of snowstorms and mended fence in weather that would make a grown man cry. So, yes, I can handle the work." Cole held up a hand in surrender. "Point taken. I wasn't trying to insult you. I just needed to be sure we both knew what we were getting into." "And now you know." Some of the tension left her shoulders. "So is that a yes?" He should probably think about it more. Should consider all the reasons why spending 2 weeks riding the backcountry with a woman he barely knew was a questionable decision. Should remember that he'd built his entire life around not needing anyone, not letting anyone close enough to see the broken places. But Riley Monroe had already seen those places, and she was still here, offering partnership instead of pity. "Yes," Cole said. "It's a yes." The relief on her face was fleeting but unmistakable. "Good. I'll start making preparations. We'll need pack horses, supplies, camping equipment if we're going to be out for more than a few days at a time." "I have most of that already," Cole interrupted. "But we should coordinate so we're not carrying duplicate supplies." They spent the next hour planning, their conversation shifting from tentative to animated as they worked out logistics. Riley pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began sketching a rough map of the area as Cole described the various homesteads and ranches, the terrain between them, the best routes for different seasons. By the time she left, full darkness had fallen outside, and Cole's head was buzzing with plans and possibilities. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was actually looking forward to something. Doc Patterson released him the next morning with strict instructions to take it easy, avoid heavy lifting, and come back immediately if the pain worsened or he noticed any signs of fever. Cole assured him he'd follow orders, collected his things from the boarding house, and headed straight to Monroe's store. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The interior was well organized and surprisingly spacious, with goods arranged in neat sections, dry goods along one wall, tools and hardware along another, fabrics and household items in the back. The smell of coffee, leather, and sawdust mingled pleasantly. Riley stood behind the counter, helping an older woman select buttons from a display case. She glanced up when Cole entered, and something flickered in her eyes, surprise maybe, or pleasure, before she returned her attention to her customer. Cole browsed while he waited, noting the quality of the merchandise and the fair pricing marked on everything. Riley ran her business the way she seemed to run everything else, efficiently, honestly, with attention to detail. The older woman finally made her selection and departed with a basket full of purchases and warm farewells. Riley turned to Cole, one eyebrow raised. "Shouldn't you be resting? I've been resting for 3 days. Any more and I'll go crazy." Cole approached the counter. "Figured I should pick up some supplies before we head out. Also wanted to see your operation here." "And? It's impressive. You've done a lot with the place in just a few weeks." Riley's cheeks colored slightly, the first time he'd seen her anything close to flustered. "It needed some reorganization. Henry was a sweet man, but his filing system was chaos incarnate." They spent the next 20 minutes assembling Cole's order: coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, and various other necessities for a cattle drive. Riley worked quickly, her hands sure as she measured and wrapped, occasionally making notes in a ledger she kept beneath the counter. "When do you want to leave?" Cole asked as she tallied his purchases. "Day after tomorrow? That gives us both time to prepare. And it's early enough in the week that we won't lose too many business days." "Works for me. I'll bring my pack horse and camping gear into town tomorrow night. Stable them at McKinnon's. We can leave at first light." Riley nodded, writing the figure on a slip of paper and sliding it across the counter. Cole paid, surprised to find the total lower than he'd expected. "You undercharged me," he said. "I gave you the rate I'd give any partner, which you are, for the next few weeks at least." Riley began loading his purchases into a sturdy canvas sack. "Besides, you're going to earn it. I'm not easy to work with when I'm focused on something." "Neither am I." "Then this should be interesting." She handed him the sack, their fingers brushing briefly. "Try not to tear those stitches before we even get started." Cole left the store with his supplies and a strange lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with healing ribs. He spent the rest of the day and all of the next preparing for the journey, checking tack, organizing supplies, selecting which horses to bring, planning the route in more detail. By the time he rode into Spokane Falls the following evening, leading his pack horse and spare mount, he'd almost convinced himself this was just a practical business arrangement. Two people helping each other out. Nothing more complicated than that. Then he saw Riley waiting outside the livery, dressed in practical riding clothes with her hair in that efficient braid, and something in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with cracked ribs. She'd changed from her store dress into canvas trousers, a man's work shirt, and a leather vest worn soft with age. High boots covered her calves, and she wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the late afternoon sun. She looked nothing like the women who promenaded down Main Street in their Sunday dresses, and everything like someone ready for hard work. "You came prepared," Cole said, dismounting carefully. "I told you I grew up on a ranch." Riley gestured to 3 horses tied nearby, a sturdy dun mare, a pack horse loaded with supplies, and a gray gelding that looked steady and reliable. "This is Juniper, my riding horse. The pack horse is Gus. He's patient and doesn't spook easily. And that's Smoke. I brought him as a spare mount in case either of us needs a fresh horse." "Good thinking." Cole began unsaddling Jupiter for the night. "We'll leave at dawn. Should reach the Peterson homestead by mid-morning if we make good time." They worked in companionable silence, settling the horses for the night and finalizing their preparations. Other people came and went from the livery, ranch hands collecting mounts, a family departing in a wagon, the usual evening traffic of a small frontier town. Cole noticed the looks they attracted, the whispered conversations that stopped when he or Riley drew near. Let them talk. People always did, and it rarely amounted to anything. But as they finished their work and Riley bid him good night, heading back to the small apartment above her store, Cole couldn't help wondering what stories would be circulating by morning. The rancher and the storekeeper, heading out alone into the backcountry for weeks. It was the sort of thing that generated gossip in any small town, let alone one as starved for entertainment as Spokane Falls. He shook off the thought and headed to the boarding house for one last night in a real bed. Tomorrow they'd be camping under the stars, and he needed to be as rested as possible for whatever challenges the trail would bring. Dawn arrived cool and clear, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold that promised good weather. Cole met Riley at the livery as planned, and together they loaded the pack horses, checked cinches, and made final adjustments to their gear. "Ready?" Riley asked, swinging into Juniper's saddle with an ease that confirmed everything she'd said about her riding ability. "Ready," Cole confirmed, mounting Jupiter more carefully but with less pain than he'd felt in over a week. They rode out of Spokane Falls just as the town was beginning to wake, joining the broad dirt road that led north into the hills. For the first hour, they traveled in silence, content to let the horses find their rhythm while morning light gradually strengthened around them. The landscape opened up as they left town behind, rolling grassland dotted with ponderosa pines, rocky outcroppings, and occasional creeks that still ran strong with mountain snowmelt. In the distance, mountains rose blue and hazy against the horizon, their peaks still capped with snow despite the advancing season. "It's beautiful out here," Riley said finally, her eyes scanning the terrain with obvious appreciation. "Different from Oregon, drier, more open, but beautiful." "You miss it? Oregon?" "Sometimes. Mostly I miss what it represented, the person I was before everything got complicated." She glanced at him. "You ever feel that way about Montana?" "Every day," Cole admitted. "But going back won't change anything. The past stays past, whether we want it to or not. Doesn't mean we stop missing it, though." "No, it doesn't." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, less careful, more honest. Two people acknowledging shared understanding without demanding details or explanations. The Peterson homestead appeared around mid-morning, a modest collection of buildings tucked into a fold of land near a creek. Smoke rose from the chimney, and chickens scattered as they rode into the yard. A wiry man in his 40s emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. His weathered face broke into a smile when he recognized Cole. "Maddox, didn't expect to see you out here. Heard you'd had some trouble with rustlers." His eyes shifted to Riley, curiosity evident. "I'm recovering. Frank Peterson, this is Riley Monroe. She owns the supply store in town now. Riley, Frank runs one of the best small operations in the territory." Frank pulled off his hat, nodding respectfully. "Ma'am, pleased to meet you. What brings you both out this way?" Riley explained her plan to establish regular delivery routes, and Cole watched Frank's expression shift from skepticism to interest as she outlined fair prices, reliable schedules, and the convenience of not having to make the long trip to town every time they needed supplies. "My wife would appreciate that," Frank said finally. "She's been after me to make more frequent trips, but with spring work, well, there's never enough hours in the day." "Then we have a deal?" Riley extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Frank shook it firmly. "We have a deal. Come inside. Martha will want to meet you, and she'll have my hide if I don't offer you both coffee." They spent an hour at the Peterson place, drinking strong coffee and eating fresh biscuits, while Martha Peterson peppered Riley with questions about what goods she could order and how the delivery system would work. By the time they left, Riley had her first official customer and a long list of requested items. "That went well," Cole said as they rode toward their next stop. "Better than I expected, honestly. I wasn't sure how receptive people would be." Riley patted the notebook she'd tucked back into her saddlebag. "2 more homesteads today, then we can start moving toward your grazing land tomorrow." The pattern repeated itself twice more that day. Cautious greetings, Cole's introductions lending credibility, Riley's straightforward competence winning people over. By evening, they'd gained 2 more customers and reached the edge of Cole's property. They made camp in a clearing near a creek, the horses hobbled and grazing nearby, while Cole and Riley worked together to set up their bedrolls and start a fire. The work went smoothly, their movements coordinated by unspoken agreement about who would handle which tasks. "You know what you're doing out here," Cole observed as Riley arranged rocks around the fire pit with practiced efficiency. "Told you I did." She sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. "My father ran a cattle operation in Oregon, 100 head, give or take. I worked right alongside him from the time I was old enough to sit a horse. He never treated me different from the sons he never had. He sounds like a good man. He was. The past tense hung heavy between them. He died 4 years ago. Heart gave out one morning while he was checking fence line. By the time anyone found him, it was too late. I'm sorry. Riley shrugged, but Cole saw the tightness around her eyes. That's when things started to fall apart. My mother couldn't run the ranch alone, and I was engaged to be married, so everyone assumed my fiancé would take over. Except he had his own ideas about what should happen to the property. She fell silent, staring into the growing flames. Cole wanted to press for more details, but recognized the signs of someone deciding how much truth to share. He wanted to sell, Riley continued finally. Said running a ranch was too much work for too little profit, and we should take the money and move to Portland where he could pursue business opportunities. I disagreed. We fought about it for months. Then one day I came home and found him meeting with a buyer, negotiating terms without telling me. What did you do? Told him the wedding was off, bought out his share of the property with money my father had left me, and ran that ranch by myself for 2 more years. Pride flickered across her face. Did a damn good job of it, too. But the rumors, the gossip about what kind of woman breaks her engagement, challenges a man's decisions, refuses to remarry, eventually it became too much. So I sold, took my money, and decided to start fresh somewhere nobody knew my history. Cole absorbed this, understanding clicking into place, and Spokane Falls was far enough away. Far enough that no one asks why I'm running a business alone. Far enough that I can make my own decisions without everyone in town having opinions about whether they're appropriate. She met his eyes across the fire. I'm not running from anything illegal or immoral, Cole, just from the weight of other people's expectations. I wasn't judging. Weren't you? Even a little? He thought about it honestly. Maybe at first, but only because I recognized the impulse. I did the same thing when I left Montana. What were you running from? Fair question, given what she'd just shared. Cole poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the darkening sky. Her name was Sarah. We were engaged, planning to marry that spring. She was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, smart, from a good family. My parents approved, her parents approved. Everyone was pleased with the match. What happened? I found out she'd been lying. About everything, really, but specifically about why she wanted to marry me. Turned out her family's ranch was failing, bad investments, drought, debt they couldn't repay. They'd arranged the whole thing, figured if she married me, they could merge our properties and my father's resources would save them from bankruptcy. Riley winced. She told you this? Not intentionally. I overheard her talking to her father about how to manage me after the wedding, make sure I agreed to support their ranch, keep me from looking too closely at their finances. The old bitterness rose in his throat. The worst part was realizing how well she'd played the role. Every smile, every touch, every word of affection, all calculated, all fake. So you left. So I left. Ended the engagement, told my parents I needed to make my own way, and came west with enough money to buy land and start over. He tossed the stick into the fire. Been on my own ever since. Figured it was safer that way. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and night sounds emerged. Crickets, an owl calling from somewhere in the pines, the soft sounds of horses shifting in their hobbles. We're a pair, aren't we? Riley said finally, a wry smile tugging at her lips. 2 people so determined not to be hurt again that we've built walls high enough to keep everyone out. Is that what we're doing? Isn't it? She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. You live alone on your ranch. Keep to yourself in town. Don't let anyone close enough to matter. I bought a business that keeps me busy enough that I don't have time for personal connections. We're both hiding, just in different ways. Cole couldn't argue with that assessment. Maybe, or maybe we're just being careful. There's a difference between careful and lonely, Cole. And which are we? Riley looked at him across the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. I think we're both. And I think that's why this partnership works. We understand each other's walls because we built the same ones. The observation was too accurate to be comfortable. Cole stood, suddenly restless. I should check the horses before we turn in. He walked the perimeter of their camp, inspecting the hobbles and making sure nothing had spooked the animals. Jupiter nickered softly when Cole approached, and he spent a moment running his hand down the stallion's neck, finding comfort in the familiar solid warmth. When he returned to the fire, Riley had rolled out both bedrolls on opposite sides of the clearing, a respectful distance apart. She'd also set out their supplies for breakfast and checked that the fire was safely contained. "I'll take first watch," Cole offered. "There's no need. We're on your property, and I haven't heard anything concerning." "Force of habit. I always take first watch when I'm out on the range." Riley studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Wake me in 4 hours and I'll take the second shift. We're partners, remember? That means sharing the work." She settled into her bedroll with the easy efficiency of someone accustomed to sleeping rough, and within minutes her breathing had evened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Cole sat by the fire, feeding it occasionally to keep the flames alive, and tried not to think about the conversation they'd just had. Tried not to acknowledge how much he'd revealed or how natural it had felt to share truths he normally kept locked away. The truth was, Riley Monroe had gotten under his skin in less than a week, had seen through his defenses with unsettling ease, and made him want things he'd sworn off years ago: companionship, partnership, the possibility of building something with someone instead of alone. It was terrifying. It was also, he was beginning to realize, inevitable. Above him, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Cole fed the fire and kept watch, protecting their small circle of light against the vast darkness of the frontier, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, being alone wasn't the same thing as being safe. 4 hours later, Cole woke Riley as promised. She emerged from her bedroll alert and ready, refusing his offer to let her sleep longer. They switched positions without discussion, and Cole lay down in the still warm blankets, expecting to spend at least an hour staring at the stars before sleep came. Instead, he dropped into darkness almost immediately, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion he'd been fighting since the injury. When he woke again, pale dawn light was filtering through the trees, and Riley had coffee brewing over a rebuilt fire. "You let me sleep," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You needed it. Your body's still healing, whether you want to admit it or not." She poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to him. "Besides, nothing happened. Quietest night I've spent outdoors in years." They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit, broke camp with the efficiency of people who'd done this countless times before, and were mounted and moving by the time the sun fully cleared the horizon. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt both new and somehow familiar. They'd rise at dawn, ride until mid-morning, visiting homesteads where Riley would conduct business while Cole checked on neighboring ranchers and caught up on local news. Afternoons were spent moving toward the higher pastures where Cole's main herd grazed, and evenings found them making camp, sharing meals and conversation that grew easier with each passing day. Riley proved every bit as capable as she'd claimed. She sat a horse like she'd been born in the saddle, read terrain with an experienced eye, and handled cattle with calm confidence. When they encountered a fence that needed mending or a water source that had become fouled, she worked alongside Cole without complaint, her hands as sure with pliers and wire as they were with account books and inventory. What surprised Cole most was how natural it felt to have her there. After 6 years of deliberate solitude, he'd expected her presence to chafe, to feel like an intrusion on the carefully ordered life he'd built. Instead, sharing the work seemed to lighten it. Tasks that usually took him a full day were completed in hours. Problems that would have required creative solutions when working alone became simple when tackled by 2 people. And the conversations. God, the conversations. They talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, funny stories about difficult customers or stubborn livestock, observations about the land and weather. Riley had opinions about everything from cattle breeding to territorial politics, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. She challenged his assumptions, asked questions that made him think, and listened with genuine interest when he explained the intricacies of managing a ranch. On the 4th day, they reached Cole's main herd grazing in a valley where spring grass still grew thick and green. 300 head of cattle spread across the landscape, most of them looking healthy and well-fed. "They look good," Riley said, surveying the herd with an experienced eye. "You've done well with them." "For now, but look at the creek." Cole pointed to the water source that ran along the eastern edge of the valley. "It's already lower than it should be for this time of year. Another month of hot weather and it'll be barely a trickle. I need to move them to the north pasture where there's better water access. How far? 8 miles, give or take. Rough terrain in places, a few creek crossings, one narrow pass that makes me nervous every time I push cattle through it. He studied the herd, mentally calculating logistics. Would normally take me 3 days by myself. With 2 of us, we might manage it in 2. When do you want to start? Tomorrow morning. We'll need today to scout the route, make sure there aren't any new obstacles since I last drove cattle through. Cole turned Jupiter north. Come on, I'll show you what we're dealing with. They spent the afternoon riding the route Cole planned to take, and Riley's respect for the challenge grew with each mile. The first few miles were straightforward enough, open grassland with gentle slopes. But then the terrain became more difficult, with rocky outcroppings that forced them to navigate carefully and thick stands of pine that would require herding the cattle through in controlled groups. The worst section was a narrow canyon where the trail squeezed between rock walls, barely wide enough for 3 cows to walk abreast. Water ran along the bottom, a smaller tributary of the main creek, and the ground was treacherous with mud and loose stones. This is going to be the challenge, Cole said, dismounting to examine the trail more closely. Cattle hate confined spaces. They'll want to bunch up, push against each other, maybe even try to turn back. We'll need to keep them calm and moving forward without spooking them. Riley studied the canyon with a frown. What if we split them into smaller groups, push through maybe 50 head at a time instead of trying to move the whole herd? That's what I usually do, but it takes forever. 300 head in groups of 50 means 6 trips through this canyon. Not if we overlap. I could take the first group through while you're gathering the second. By the time you bring them to the canyon entrance, I'll have secured the first group and can come back to help push the second through. Riley walked the length of the canyon, her eyes constantly moving as she assessed angles and potential problems. We'd need to set up a temporary holding area on the far side to keep each group from wandering before we get them all through. Cole thought through her suggestion, testing it for flaws. That could work. Would cut our time significantly. It'll also be exhausting. We'll basically be running back and forth all day. Better than spending 3 days doing it alone. He remounted Jupiter, already feeling more optimistic about the task ahead. Let's keep moving. I want to see what the North Pasture looks like before we commit to this plan. The North Pasture exceeded Riley's expectations. A broad valley with multiple water sources fed by springs that ran year-round, protected on 3 sides by forested hills that would provide shade during the hottest months. The grass grew thick here, untouched since Cole had moved his herd out last fall. This is perfect, Riley said. Why don't you keep them here permanently? Winter. Those springs don't freeze completely, but the snow gets deep enough that the cattle can't forage effectively. The South Valley is lower elevation, less snow accumulation, more shelter from the worst storms. Cole gestured toward the surrounding landscape. Ranching up here is all about moving with the seasons. Summer in the high country, winter in the valleys. They made camp that evening near one of the springs, and Riley insisted on checking Cole's injury while there was still good light. He protested that he was fine, that Doc Patterson had pronounced him healed enough for regular activity, but she ignored his objections with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything else. Shirt off, she ordered, setting out the medical supplies she'd packed. Riley, don't Riley me. You've been working hard for 4 days straight, and I want to make sure you haven't torn anything loose. Now shirt off, or I'll remove it myself. Cole sighed and complied, carefully pulling his shirt over his head. The movement still pulled uncomfortably at his left side, but nothing like the stabbing pain of a week ago. Riley's hands were gentle as she unwrapped the bandage, her fingers cool against his overheated skin. She examined the wound site with a critical eye, testing the skin around the injury for signs of heat or swelling. It looks good, she said finally. No infection, healing cleanly. You'll have a scar, but that's unavoidable with this type of injury. Won't be my first. Cole gestured to a long white line across his right shoulder. Got that one breaking a horse when I was 19, and there's another on my leg from a barbed wire accident that I won't show you because it would require removing more clothing than is appropriate. Riley laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet evening. I appreciate your sense of propriety. She began rewrapping the bandage with practiced efficiency. Though I've probably seen worse. My father was always getting injured, kicked by horses, gored by bulls, cut on any sharp object within reach. My mother finally taught me basic wound care out of self-defense. Your mother sounds practical. She is. Riley's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. We don't talk much anymore. She remarried about a year after I broke my engagement, and her new husband has very traditional views about how women should behave. My independence makes him uncomfortable. That must be hard. It is what it is. She tied off the bandage and sat back. People make choices. Sometimes those choices mean losing people we care about, but the alternative, compromising who we are to make others comfortable, that's worse. Cole pulled his shirt back on, struck by the conviction in her voice. You really believe that? Don't you? You left your entire life behind in Montana rather than marry someone who'd lied to you. That's choosing yourself over others' expectations. I suppose it is. He'd never thought of it quite that way, though some might say it was just running away. Some people are idiots. Riley began packing the medical supplies away. There's nothing noble about staying in situations that diminish us. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is leave. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled around them. The spring bubbled nearby, a constant liquid whisper that seemed to ease something tight in Cole's chest. Above them, stars began to appear, tentative at first and then increasingly bold as the last light faded from the sky. Storm's coming, Riley said suddenly, her eyes on the horizon where clouds were gathering. Cole followed her gaze and cursed quietly. She was right. The distinctive anvil shape of thunderheads was building to the west, illuminated occasionally by internal flashes of lightning still too distant to hear. How long do we have? Hour, maybe less. Riley was already moving, her actions quick but controlled. We need better shelter than our bedrolls. They worked together in the fading light, gathering their scattered supplies and moving the horses to a more protected area near a rock overhang. The wind picked up as they worked, bringing the smell of rain and ozone. Cole spotted a shallow cave cut into the hillside about 50 yards from their original camp. It wasn't large, maybe 8 feet deep and 10 feet wide, but the opening faced away from the approaching storm, and there was room enough for both of them and their essential supplies. There, he pointed. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry. They hauled their gear to the cave just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the sky opened up, rain sheeting down in wind-driven curtains that turned the landscape gray and indistinct. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough that the thunder followed immediately, a rolling boom that seemed to shake the ground. The horses shifted nervously in their partial shelter, but held their ground. Jupiter called out once, a high nervous sound, and Cole almost went to him before Riley's hand on his arm stopped him. They're fine. The overhang will protect them enough, and going out there now will just worry them more. She was right, but it went against every instinct Cole had. He settled back against the cave wall, watching the storm with the fatalistic acceptance of someone who'd spent enough time outdoors to know that nature cared nothing for human convenience. Riley had managed to light their small camp lantern before the rain hit, and its warm glow pushed back the darkness of the cave. She sat with her back against the opposite wall, her knees drawn up, watching the storm with an expression that Cole couldn't quite read. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine. I've always liked storms, the power of them, the way they remind us how small we really are." Another crack of lightning lit up the cave entrance, and Riley's face was briefly illuminated in stark relief. My father used to say that storms were nature's way of keeping humans humble. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Her voice went soft with memory. I miss him, especially at times like this. He would have loved planning this cattle drive, figuring out the logistics, problem-solving the difficult sections. "Tell me about him," Cole said, surprising himself with the request. Riley was quiet for a long moment, and Cole thought maybe he'd overstepped. But then she began to talk, her words coming slow at first and then faster, spilling out like water from a breaking dam. She told him about her father's laugh, his patience with animals, his insistence on treating her like a capable person rather than a delicate daughter. She described his death, the suddenness of it, the way it had shattered her world in an instant. Cole listened without interrupting, letting her words fill the space between them. When she finally fell silent, he found himself sharing his own stories. About his father's disappointment when Cole had refused the arranged marriage, about his mother's tears when he'd left Montana, about the guilt he still carried for choosing himself over his family's expectations. The storm raged outside their shelter, but inside the cave, something gentler was happening. Two people were letting their walls down, brick by careful brick, and discovering that the vulnerability was less terrifying than they'd imagined. At some point, Cole wasn't sure when, they'd moved closer to each other, drawn together by the shared intimacy of confession. Riley sat near enough now that he could see the varied colors in her eyes, blue shot through with silver and gray, and the small scar above her eyebrow that he'd noticed that first day in the livery. "How did you get that?" he asked, reaching up to touch the scar before he thought better of it. Riley didn't pull away from his touch. "Fell out of a tree when I was 9. I'd climbed up to rescue a kitten, cliché I know, and the branch broke. Landed on a rock and split my eyebrow open. My mother was furious, my father was trying not to laugh, and I was more worried about whether the kitten was okay." "Was it?" "Yes. The ungrateful creature scratched me when I finally got it down, then ran off and never came near me again." She smiled at the memory. "My father said it was a good lesson about the perils of trying to rescue things that don't want to be rescued." "That's a hard lesson." "Most good ones are." Riley's smile faded, and her expression became serious. "Cole, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really out here alone? I know what you told me about Sarah, about wanting to make your own way. But there's more to it, isn't there? Something you're not saying." Cole's first instinct was to deflect, to give her a surface answer that would satisfy without revealing too much. But they'd already crossed so many lines tonight, shared so many truths. What was one more? "After Sarah, I tried," he said slowly. "I tried to believe that not everyone was like her, that I could trust again. There was a woman in Billings. Martha, her name was. Sweet, kind, seemed genuine. We courted for about 6 months. What happened? I found out she was only interested because she thought I had money. Turns out Sarah had spread rumors before I left Montana, told people I'd inherited a fortune from a grandfather, that I was keeping it secret because I didn't want gold diggers. Martha had heard the rumors and decided to test their validity." Riley winced. "That's awful." "The worst part was how good she was at pretending, even better than Sarah if that's possible. Made me question my own judgment, my ability to read people." Cole stared at his hands, remembering the particular shame of that second betrayal. "After that, I stopped trying. Figured if I couldn't trust my own instincts about people, the safest thing was just to avoid getting close to anyone. But you're here now, with me." "I know." He met her eyes, "and it terrifies me." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Outside, the storm seemed to be reaching its peak, thunder and lightning coming almost simultaneously, rain pounding against the earth with such force that it created a constant roar. Riley reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "It terrifies me too. The last time I let someone close, he tried to sell my life out from under me. The time before that, my mother chose a man who couldn't accept who I am. I've learned to be careful, to keep people at a distance where they can't hurt me." "Then why are you holding my hand?" "Because careful and lonely are two different things, remember? And because sometimes the risk is worth it." She squeezed his fingers gently. "I like you, Cole Maddox. I like your stubbornness and your strength and the way you try so hard to pretend you don't need anyone even though you clearly do. I like that you didn't dismiss me or patronize me or try to manage me. I like that you see me as a partner, not as a woman you need to protect or control." Cole's heart was hammering in his chest, and it had nothing to do with the storm. "Riley, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens after these 2 weeks end, I want you to know that meeting you has mattered." The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Cole could hear his own breathing, too fast and shallow, and felt the warmth of Riley's hand in his. He should pull away. Should maintain the distance that had kept him safe for 6 years. Should remember all the reasons why letting someone close was dangerous. Instead, he lifted his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of that small scar above her eyebrow. Riley's breath caught, and her eyes went wide. "It matters to me too," Cole said quietly. "You matter to me, and that scares the hell out of me. But I'm tired of being scared. tired of being alone, tired of protecting myself from something that might never happen. Cole. He kissed her, not roughly, not with demands or expectations, but gently, a question rather than a statement. Riley made a small sound against his mouth and kissed him back, her free hand coming up to curl into his shirt. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cave time seemed to slow and soften. They kissed like people who'd been starving without knowing it, drinking in the warmth and connection they'd both denied themselves for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against Riley's and tried to remember why he'd ever thought being alone was safer. "This complicates things," Riley said, her voice unsteady. "I know. We're business partners. We have a job to finish. I know that too. And we live 8 miles apart with completely different lives and responsibilities. Riley," Cole pulled back enough to look at her properly, "I know all of that, but I also know that I haven't felt this alive in 6 years, and I'm not ready to pretend this didn't happen just because it's complicated." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look younger, lighter. "Good, because I'm not ready to pretend either." They sat together in the cave entrance, Riley leaning against Cole's shoulder while the storm slowly spent itself. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable now, full of understanding rather than uncertainty. Eventually the rain softened to a drizzle, and the thunder moved off to the east. The smell of wet earth and sage filled the air, sharp and clean. Cole's ribs ached from the awkward position, but he didn't move, didn't want to disturb this moment, this fragile peace they'd found in the middle of the storm. "We should try to sleep," Riley said finally, though she made no move to get up. "Tomorrow's going to be hard work." "Probably." Cole pressed a kiss to the top of her head, marveling at his own boldness. "But I'm not ready to let go yet." "Then don't." So they stayed that way, wrapped around each other in the mouth of the cave, while the storm rolled away and the night settled into calm. Eventually exhaustion claimed them both, and they dozed in shifts, waking periodically to feed the lantern or check on the horses before settling back into their shared warmth. When dawn finally came, gray and soft through lingering clouds, Cole woke to find Riley already up, stirring the fire she'd somehow managed to coax back to life. She looked over when she heard him move and smiled, a private smile just for him that made his chest feel too full. "Morning," she said. "Coffee's almost ready." "Morning." Cole stood carefully, working the kinks out of his back and shoulder. His ribs protested the movement, but less than they had in days. "How do the horses look?" "Fine. A little restless from the storm, but otherwise healthy." Riley poured coffee into 2 cups and brought one to him. "The canyon's going to be muddy today. Might be worth waiting until this afternoon to start the drive, give the ground some time to drain." But Cole nodded, accepting both the coffee and the shift, back to practical matters. Last night had been, he didn't have words for what last night had been. But now it was morning, and they had work to do. Time enough later to figure out what this thing between them meant, where it might lead. For now, it was enough to stand beside her in the fresh morning air, drinking bitter coffee and watching the sun try to break through the clouds. Enough to know that he wasn't alone anymore, that the walls he'd built so carefully had found their match in someone just as stubborn and scared and brave as he was. They spent the morning checking the cattle and scouting the canyon again, verifying that the storm hadn't created any new obstacles. The mud was thick and treacherous, but by afternoon it had dried enough that Cole felt confident proceeding. "Remember the plan," he said, as they positioned themselves on opposite sides of the herd. "Small groups, steady pressure, don't let them bunch. If anything goes wrong, back off and we'll regroup." "Got it." Riley sat easy in Juniper's saddle, completely focused. "Let's move some cattle." The actual drive was every bit as challenging as Cole had anticipated. The cattle were skittish after the storm, reluctant to leave their familiar grazing area. It took nearly an hour to cut out the first group of 50 and start them moving in the right direction. But Riley was brilliant at it. She seemed to anticipate what the cattle would do before they did it, positioning Juniper to block escape routes or encourage forward movement with an almost uncanny precision. She used her voice, low, calm, constant, to keep the animals settled, and her rope when necessary to discourage the stubborn ones from breaking away. Cole found himself forgetting to focus on his own work, too caught up in watching her. This was what she'd been trying to tell him, that she was more than capable, that she didn't need protecting or managing. Here, in her element, she was magnificent. "Eyes on your own cattle, Maddox," Riley called, amusement clear in her voice. Cole jerked his attention back to his section of the herd, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. He heard Riley laugh, the sound carrying over the lowing of the cattle and the splash of hooves through mud. They pushed the first group through the canyon without incident, Riley staying with them on the far side while Cole rode back for the second group. The system worked exactly as she'd predicted. By overlapping their efforts, they cut the time significantly. By late afternoon, they'd moved half the herd, and both of them were exhausted, covered in mud and sweat, and thoroughly pleased with their progress. "We'll finish tomorrow," Cole said as they made camp that evening. "Another day like today, and we'll have them all in the north pasture." "Good." Riley winced as she dismounted, her movements stiff. "I forgot how hard this kind of work is. I'm going to feel this tomorrow." "You were amazing today. I've worked with experienced ranch hands who couldn't handle cattle that well." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Cowboy." But Riley's pleased smile told him the compliment had landed. "Though, if we're being honest, you're pretty good at this yourself." They settled into their evening routine, caring for the horses, preparing a simple meal, sitting by the fire while darkness gathered. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility, weighted with the knowledge of what had passed between them in the cave. Cole found himself hyper-aware of Riley's every movement, the way she pushed hair back from her face, the curve of her neck when she tilted her head to look at the stars, the graceful strength in her hands as she worked. "You're staring again," Riley said without looking at him. "Can you blame me?" Now she did look at him, her expression somewhere between exasperation and fondness. "Cole Maddox, what am I going to do with you?" "I have some ideas." "I bet you do." She stood brushing dirt from her pants. "But right now I need to wash some of this mud off before I turn into a permanent part of the landscape. There's a pool about 50 yards downstream. I scouted it earlier. I'm going to take a quick bath." "Need company?" The words were out before Cole could stop them, and he immediately wanted to take them back. Too forward, too presumptuous. But Riley just laughed. "Nice try. But no, you're going to stay here by the fire and be a gentleman while I have some privacy. Think you can manage that?" "Probably not, but I'll try." She left, and Cole forced himself to stay put, occupying his hands and mind with unnecessary tasks. He checked their supplies 3 times, reorganized their gear, and added wood to a fire that didn't need it. When Riley returned 20 minutes later, her hair loose and damp around her shoulders, Cole forgot how to breathe. She'd changed into a clean shirt and her face was scrubbed fresh, and something about the combination of practical clothes and that cascade of unbound hair made her look simultaneously approachable and impossibly beautiful. "Your turn," she said, settling by the fire. "And don't take too long. The water's cold." Cole grabbed his own clean clothes and headed for the pool. The water was indeed cold, but it felt good against his overheated skin. He washed quickly, checking his injury and finding it holding up well despite the day's exertion. When he returned to camp, Riley had laid out both bedrolls, significantly closer together than they'd been the previous nights. She looked up at his approach, and there was a question in her eyes. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. Cole answered by lying down beside her, pulling her close so that her head rested on his shoulder. "More than okay." They lay together under the vast western sky, wrapped in blankets and each other's warmth. Riley's fingers traced idle patterns on Cole's chest, and he played with her hair, marveling at the softness of it. "What happens when we get back to town?" Riley asked eventually. Cole had been avoiding that question, but he knew they'd have to face it eventually. "I don't know. What do you want to happen?" "I want to see where this goes, but we'll have to be discreet. Small towns talk, and I can't afford to have my reputation damaged when I'm trying to establish a business." "I understand." Cole did understand, even if the need for secrecy stung slightly. "So we'll be careful. Professional in public, whatever we are in private." "Whatever we are," Riley echoed. "That's the question, isn't it? What are we, Cole?" "I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out." He tightened his arm around her. "If you're willing to take the risk." I seem to be developing a habit of taking risks where you're concerned. Riley tilted her head up to look at him. Though this one feels different, like maybe it's worth it. Cole kissed her again, softer than before, trying to pour into the kiss all the things he didn't know how to say. That she'd woken something in him he'd thought dead. That her presence made the world feel less lonely. That he was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. When they finally settled into sleep, still wrapped around each other, Cole's last conscious thought was that he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this much peace. Or this much hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone brave enough to climb over the walls he'd built and stubborn enough to stay. The second day of the cattle drive went more smoothly than the first. Cole and Riley worked in perfect synchronization, their movements coordinated by an understanding that seemed to have developed overnight. The remaining cattle moved through the canyon in steady groups, and by late afternoon the entire herd was grazing contentedly in the north pasture. Cole sat on Jupiter, surveying their work with satisfaction. 300 head of healthy cattle, good water access, plenty of forage. It was everything he'd hoped for, accomplished in half the time it would have taken him alone. "We did it," Riley said, bringing Juniper alongside. Her face was flushed with exertion and pleasure, and there was a smudge of dirt across her cheek that Cole wanted to wipe away. "That's a good day's work." "More than good. We make a hell of a team." "We do." Riley's smile was bright and genuine. "Though I'm going to sleep for a week once we get back to town." They made camp one final time on Cole's property, at the line shack he maintained near the north pasture. It was a simple structure. One room with a wood stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a single bed built into the corner. Nothing fancy, but after days of sleeping on the ground, it felt like luxury. Cole started a fire in the stove while Riley tended the horses, and soon the small space was warming up against the cooling evening air. They shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, their shoulders touching in the cramped quarters, neither bothering to maintain any distance. "I should probably sleep outside," Cole said, eyeing the single narrow bed. "Give you the cabin." "Don't be ridiculous. We've been sleeping beside each other for 3 nights already." Riley stood, stretching muscles that were clearly protesting the day's work. "Besides, that bed is barely big enough for 1 person, let alone 2. We'll have to share whether we want to or not." "Riley, oh, stop being noble. It doesn't suit you." She began unpacking her bedroll. "We're both adults. We can share a bed without it meaning anything more than practical sleeping arrangements. Except it did mean something more, and they both knew it." But Cole didn't argue as they prepared for sleep, moving around each other in the small space with an ease that suggested they'd done this 100 times before. The bed was indeed barely big enough for 1 person. With 2, they had no choice but to press close together, Riley's back tucked against Cole's chest, his arm draped over her waist. She fit against him perfectly, like she'd been designed specifically for this purpose. "Comfortable?" Cole asked, his voice rough. "Very." Riley laced her fingers through his. "This is nice. I'd forgotten how nice it is to just be close to someone without expectations or demands, just warmth and presence." "I never had it, not really." The admission came easier in the darkness. Even before Sarah's betrayal, our courtship was always about appearances, about doing things properly, meeting others' expectations. There was never just this, just being together because we wanted to be. Riley squeezed his hand. Then we're both learning something new. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other in the narrow bed, and Cole dreamed of possibilities he'd stopped letting himself imagine years ago. Morning came too soon. They had to return to town today, back to their separate lives and the careful distance they'd agreed to maintain in public. Cole found himself dragging his feet as they prepared to leave, finding excuses to delay their departure. "We need to go," Riley said finally, though her tone suggested she was no more eager than he was. "I've been away from the store for almost a week. God knows what chaos awaits me." The ride back to Spokane Falls took most of the day. They stopped twice at homesteads Riley had visited earlier in the week, confirming delivery arrangements and taking new orders. Each time, Cole watched her work, confident, professional, treating ranchers and homesteaders with the same respect regardless of the size of their orders. By the time they reached town, it was late afternoon, and Main Street was busy with end-of-day traffic. People turned to watch as they rode in, leading their pack horses, both of them dusty and trail-worn. Cole saw the looks, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when they drew near, felt the weight of small-town scrutiny settling over them like a heavy blanket. Riley must have felt it too, because she straightened in her saddle and lifted her chin in a gesture Cole was beginning to recognize as her response to judgment. They rode directly to the livery, dismounted without discussion, and began the work of unsaddling and caring for the horses. "Miss Monroe! Mr. Maddox!" Mrs. Fletcher appeared in the livery entrance, her face alight with curiosity. "You're back! We'd heard you were out on business together. How did it go?" "Very well, thank you," Riley said coolly. "I've established delivery routes to 7 homesteads and 2 ranches. It should significantly expand my customer base. And you, Mr. Maddox? I trust your cattle drive was successful?" "It was. Miss Monroe's help made the work much easier." Cole kept his tone neutral, professional, giving the landlady nothing to speculate about. But Mrs. Fletcher's eyes darted between them, clearly noting the easy way they worked together, the unspoken coordination of their movements. "Well, how nice that you could help each other. I'm sure it was all very proper." The implication hung heavy in the air. Riley's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Perfectly proper, I assure you. Mr. Maddox was a gentleman throughout. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on my store." She left without looking at Cole, her spine rigid with suppressed anger. He wanted to follow, to tell Mrs. Fletcher and everyone else in this gossipy town that Riley Monroe's reputation was spotless, and anyone who suggested otherwise would answer to him. But that would only make things worse, fuel the speculation they were trying to avoid. So he finished with Jupiter in silence, trying to ignore the knowing looks from the stable hands and the whispered conversations that followed him as he left the livery. He headed straight for the boarding house, collected his few belongings from the room he'd rented, and prepared to ride home. The thought of his empty cabin, after a week of Riley's constant presence, made something in his chest ache. But what choice did he have? They'd agreed to be discreet. That meant separate lives in town, no matter how much it cost them. He was loading his saddlebags when someone knocked on the door. Cole opened it to find Riley standing in the hallway, her expression stormy. "Can I come in?" Cole stepped aside, checking the hallway before closing the door. "What's wrong? What's wrong? Did you hear the way Mrs. Fletcher was talking to us? Like we'd done something shameful, like spending a week working together somehow makes us less respectable." Riley paced the small room, her movements sharp with frustration. "I've been back in my store for all of 30 minutes, and I've already had 2 concerned customers asking whether I'm all right, whether you behaved appropriately, whether I need the minister to speak with me about proper conduct." "Riley!" "And the worst part is we haven't done anything wrong. We work together. That's all anyone needs to know. But because I'm a woman and you're a man and we spent time alone together, suddenly it's a scandal." She stopped pacing, facing him with eyes that blazed. "I'm so tired of this. Tired of having to justify my choices. Tired of being judged for having the audacity to run my own business and make my own decisions." Cole crossed to her, taking her shoulders gently. "I know, and I'm sorry. If I'd known it would cause you this much trouble." "Don't!" Riley cut him off. "Don't apologize for something that isn't your fault. This isn't about you. It's about a society that can't accept women operating outside very narrow boundaries." She took a shaky breath. "I knew it would be like this. I prepared myself for it. But knowing it's coming doesn't make it any easier when it happens." "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell them all to mind their own damn business, but that would just confirm their worst assumptions about me." Riley leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. "So instead, I'll smile and be polite and assure everyone that you were a perfect gentleman and nothing inappropriate occurred. And we'll pretend that what's growing between us doesn't exist." Cole wrapped his arms around her, feeling the tension in her body. "Is that what you really want?" "No, but it's what we agreed to." She pulled back to look at him. "Unless you've changed your mind." He thought about it seriously, about what it would mean to court Riley openly, to declare his intentions publicly. The town would talk, was already talking, but eventually they'd move on to some new scandal. And in the meantime, he and Riley could stop hiding, stop pretending that this thing between them was anything less than significant. "What if I have changed my mind?" Cole said slowly. What if I don't want to hide anymore? Riley's eyes widened. Cole, we talked about this. I can't afford to have your reputation damaged. I know, but what if we did this properly? What if I courted you the way you deserve to be courted? Openly, respectfully, with clear, honorable intentions. He took her hands in his. Let them talk. Eventually they'll see that this is real, that I'm serious about you. And then what can they say? They can say plenty. Trust me, I've heard it all before. But you won't be facing it alone. You'll have me standing beside you, making it clear that anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. Cole squeezed her hands. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Riley. I'm just asking for the chance to see where this goes without hiding it, to take you to Sunday dinner at the hotel, to walk with you down Main Street, to visit your store without worrying that someone will get the wrong idea. Riley was quiet for a long moment, searching his face. You're serious about this? Completely serious. These past few days with you, they've been the best I've had in years, maybe ever. And I'm tired of being alone, tired of protecting myself from possibilities. He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I want to try, Riley. With you. If you're willing. People will talk. Let them. My business might suffer. Or it might thrive once people see that I trust you and respect your independence. My endorsement carries weight around here, whether I like it or not. A small smile tugged at Riley's lips. You've really thought this through. I had 8 miles of riding to think about it, and every mile convinced me more that hiding what we're building is a mistake. Cole pulled her closer. So, what do you say, Miss Monroe? May I have the pleasure of courting you properly? The smile that spread across Riley's face was worth every risk, every potential complication. Yes, I'd like that very much. Cole kissed her then, long and thorough, pouring into it all the hope and fear and desperate wanting he'd been carrying since that night in the cave. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I should go, Riley said, though she made no move to leave. If we're doing this properly, we probably shouldn't be found alone in your room. Probably not, Cole released her reluctantly, though I wish you could stay. Soon, once we've established that this is a real courtship and not some sordid affair. She straightened her clothes, tucking stray wisps of hair back into her braid. When will I see you again? Tomorrow? I could come by the store in the afternoon, take you for a drive. That sounds perfect. Riley moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Cole? Thank you for being willing to do this the right way, even though it would be easier to hide. Nothing about you has been easy, Riley Monroe, but it's been worth every difficult moment. After she left, Cole finished packing and rode home through the gathering dusk. The cabin felt emptier than usual when he arrived, the silence more oppressive, but there was also a lightness in his chest that hadn't been there before. The knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore, that someone was waiting for him back in town. He spent the next morning catching up on ranch work he'd neglected during the cattle drive, but his mind kept wandering to Riley, to the way she looked in the early morning light, to the sound of her laugh, to the feeling of her hand in his. He rode into town that afternoon freshly washed and wearing his best shirt, feeling absurdly nervous for someone who'd already kissed the woman he was courting. But this was different. This was public, a declaration that they were more than business associates or friends. Monroe's Goods and Provisions was busy when he arrived, several customers browsing the shelves while Riley handled transactions behind the counter. She looked up when the bell chimed, and her face lit with a smile that made Cole's nervousness evaporate. Mr. Maddox, she said formally, though her eyes were warm, what brings you to town? I was hoping you might have time for a drive this afternoon, Miss Monroe. The weather's fine, and I thought you might enjoy getting out of the store for a bit. Several customers turned to watch this exchange with obvious interest. Riley maintained her composure beautifully, her expression pleasant but professional. That sounds lovely. Let me just close up early today. She glanced at the wall clock. In about 30 minutes, will that work? Perfect. I'll wait outside. Cole retreated to the bench outside the store, acutely aware of the eyes watching him through the window. He nodded to passing townspeople, made small talk with old Bill Henderson when the trader stopped to chat, and tried to appear completely natural about courting the independent storekeeper who'd scandalized half the town by going on a business trip with him. True to her word, Riley emerged exactly 30 minutes later wearing a simple day dress in deep blue that brought out her eyes. She'd pinned up her hair in a more formal style, and there was color in her cheeks that might have been rouge or might have been nerves. "Ready?" Cole offered his arm. Riley took it with a smile. "Ready." They walked down Main Street to where Cole had left his wagon. He'd brought it instead of riding, figuring it would be more appropriate for courting, and he helped her up to the seat. Several people called greetings as they drove past, and Cole made a point of tipping his hat and responding cheerfully, showing the town that he had nothing to hide. He drove them out to a spot he knew overlooking the river, a peaceful clearing where cottonwoods provided shade and the sound of rushing water provided privacy. They sat on a blanket Cole had brought, eating the picnic lunch Riley had packed, and talked about everything and nothing. "How's your store been?" Cole asked. "Any fallout from our trip?" "Some. A few of my more conservative customers made pointed comments about propriety, but I've also had 3 new customers come in specifically because they heard I was willing to make deliveries to remote homesteads." Riley selected an apple from the basket. "Overall, I'd say it's been positive. Your endorsement helped more than you probably realize." "Good. That's good." Cole watched her bite into the apple, mesmerized by such a simple action. "I meant what I said yesterday, Riley. I'm serious about this. About you." "I know you are. That's what scares me." She set down the apple, her expression becoming serious. "The last time someone said they were serious about me, it ended with him trying to sell my father's ranch without my permission. Forgive me if I'm a little gun-shy about trust. I'm not him. I know that too. Logically, I know it. But there's a difference between knowing something and believing it deep down where it counts." Riley twisted her hands in her lap. "I want to believe you, Cole. I want to trust that this is real and that you won't wake up one morning and decide I'm too much trouble, too independent, too unwilling to fit the mold of what a proper woman should be." Cole set aside his own food and took her restless hands in his. "Riley, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I'm not asking you to change. I don't want you to fit any mold. What I want is you, exactly as you are. Stubborn and independent and capable and completely unwilling to let anyone tell you who you should be. You say that now, Dad, and I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after, until you believe it." He raised one of her hands to his lips. "I'm not perfect, Riley. I'll make mistakes. I'll probably be overprotective sometimes, or say the wrong thing, or not understand why something matters to you. But I promise I'll always listen. I'll always respect your choices, even when I don't agree with them. And I'll never ever try to control you or take away your independence." Tears shimmered in Riley's eyes. "That's all I've ever wanted. Someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as property to be managed or a problem to be solved." "Then that's what I'll be. Your partner. Your equal." Cole brushed a thumb across her cheek, catching a tear that had escaped. "And if I ever forget, you have my permission to remind me forcefully." Riley laughed through her tears. "Oh, I will. Trust me on that." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking and laughing and slowly building the foundation of something that might become permanent. When Cole finally drove Riley back to town, the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Same time next week?" he asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "I'd like that." Riley glanced around. The street was mostly empty at this hour, then stood on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for today. For all of this." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Monroe." Cole watched her enter her store before driving to the livery, a smile tugging at his lips. They were doing this, really doing this, building something real and honest and, if he let himself hope, potentially permanent. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Cole would ride into town twice a week, always in the afternoon when Riley could take a break from the store. Sometimes they'd go for drives, sometimes they'd just walk through town or sit on the bench outside her store and talk. Always in public, always proper, showing Spokane Falls that their courtship was respectable and their intentions honorable. The gossip gradually died down as people got used to seeing them together. A few of Riley's customers remained coolly disapproving, but most seemed willing to accept that the storekeeper and the rancher were courting seriously. On Sundays they attended church together, sitting in the back pew where Cole had always sat alone. Riley would slide in beside him, their shoulders touching, and he'd marvel at how natural it felt to have her there. After services, they'd walk to the hotel for Sunday dinner, joining the other respectable couples of Spokane Falls in the ritual of the week's best meal. Doc Patterson made a point of congratulating Cole on his excellent taste and warning Riley that ranchers made difficult husbands. Mrs. Fletcher watched them with sharp eyes but seemed mollified by their proper behavior. Even Bill Henderson, who'd been skeptical at first, admitted that Riley was good for Cole and that maybe the town needed more independent-minded women. But the best times were the quiet moments stolen away from prying eyes. Evening walks that stretched long after darkness fell, conversations on Riley's small porch above the store, stolen kisses in the shadows between buildings. They were careful, always aware of potential observers, but the connection between them deepened with each passing day. Cole found himself planning his weeks around his visits to town, found excuses to need supplies from Riley's store, found reasons to extend each visit for just a few more minutes. His ranch work didn't suffer. If anything, he worked more efficiently, motivated by the reward of time with Riley waiting at the end. And Riley bloomed under the attention. The wariness in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by genuine warmth and trust. She laughed more easily, touched him more freely, let him see sides of herself she'd clearly kept hidden for years. 2 months after their cattle drive, Cole rode into town on a Wednesday afternoon instead of his usual Thursday, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. He found Riley in her store helping a customer select fabric and waited patiently until they were alone. "This is a surprise," Riley said, coming around the counter to greet him properly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine." Cole held out the package. "I brought you something." Riley took it with curious eyes, carefully unwrapping the paper to reveal a book, a brand new copy of a novel she'd mentioned wanting weeks ago. Her eyes widened with delight. "Cole, you remembered! I only mentioned this once. I remember everything you tell me." He watched her flip through the pages with gentle fingers. "You said you used to read novels when you lived in Oregon, but you sold most of your books before moving here. I thought maybe you'd like to start rebuilding your collection." "It's perfect." Riley looked up at him, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you. No one's given me a gift like this in years." Then they were fools. Cole took a step closer, emboldened by the empty store. "Riley, I need to ask you something." "All right. I know we've only been courting for 2 months. I know the proper thing would be to wait longer, make sure we're compatible, let the town get completely used to seeing us together." He took her free hand in his. "But I'm not a patient man, and I'm tired of pretending I have any doubts about what I want." Riley's breath caught. "Cole, I'm not proposing, not yet, but I want you to know that's where this is heading if you'll have me. I want to build a life with you, Riley. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work alongside you, whether that's on my ranch or in your store or some combination of both. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word." "That's what I want too," Riley said softly. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, afraid that wanting it would somehow jinx it, make it disappear like every other good thing in my life. But I do want it. I want you." Cole cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing along her cheekbones. "Then when I do propose, properly, with a ring and all the traditional trappings, what will your answer be?" "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "My answer will be yes." He kissed her then, there in her store with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, pouring into it all the promise and hope he'd barely let himself feel. Riley kissed him back with equal fervor, the book falling forgotten to the counter as her arms came up to circle his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Riley Monroe. I probably have since you took Jupiter's reins out of my hands and refused to let me be stubborn about my own injury. I love you too. Though I think I might have fallen a little bit in love during the cattle drive, watching you work and realizing you saw me as an equal." Riley's smile was radiant. "When will you do it? The official proposal?" "Soon. I need to save up for a proper ring. You deserve better than some hastily purchased band from the general store." Cole pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I want to do it right. Somewhere meaningful. Somewhere that feels like us." I'll wait. Riley pulled him down for another kiss. I've waited this long for someone who sees me for who I really am. I can wait a little longer for everything to be perfect. They spent the rest of that afternoon planning a future that felt suddenly, gloriously real. They talked about how they'd manage 2 properties and 2 businesses, about whether Riley would keep the store or sell it, about children and what they teach them about independence and partnership. By the time Cole finally forced himself to leave, riding home under a sky full of stars, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had a purpose beyond simple survival, a reason to look forward to each new day. He had Riley, and she had him, and together they were building something neither of them had thought possible, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. The cabin didn't feel quite so empty that night, because Cole knew it was temporary, that soon it would be filled with Riley's presence, her laughter, her strength. Soon he wouldn't be alone anymore, and that knowledge, that promise of a shared future, was worth every risk he'd taken, every wall he'd let crumble, every moment of vulnerability that had terrified him. He'd found his partner, his equal, his home. Now he just needed to figure out how to propose in a way that would do justice to the extraordinary woman who'd taken his reins and his heart with equal confidence. Cole spent the next 3 weeks working harder than he'd ever worked in his life. Every spare moment that wasn't devoted to essential ranch work or visiting Riley went toward a project that consumed his thoughts and energy. He rode into Cheney twice to sell some of his best steers, using the money to purchase materials and hire skilled craftsmen for specific tasks he couldn't handle alone. Riley noticed the change immediately. On their next Sunday together, as they walked along the river after church, she called him on it. "You're distracted," she said, studying his face, "and you've got sawdust in your hair. What are you building?" "Can't tell you. It's a surprise." "I don't like surprises." "You'll like this one." Cole brushed a kiss across her temple. "Trust me?" Riley sighed but nodded. "I trust you, though I reserve the right to be annoyed if this surprise takes too much longer. I miss having your full attention." "Just a few more weeks. I promise it'll be worth the wait." What Cole was building was an addition to his cabin, 2 rooms that would transform his bachelor quarters into a proper home. A bedroom with space for a real bed and a wardrobe, and a sitting room with windows that faced east to catch the morning light. He was also expanding the kitchen area, adding shelves and a better stove, and a table large enough for a family. The work was backbreaking. He spent dawn to dusk cutting timber, hauling stone, fitting joints, and laying floorboards. His hands became covered in splinters and calluses, his back ached constantly, and he fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. But every board he placed, every nail he drove, brought him closer to the moment when he could bring Riley here and show her what he'd built. A home worthy of her, a place where they could start their life together. The craftsman he'd hired, a Norwegian carpenter named Lars who'd settled in Cheney, came out twice to help with the more complex joinery and to ensure the roof wouldn't leak. He worked in companionable silence mostly, offering advice when asked, but otherwise letting Cole pour his energy into the construction. "You build this for a woman," Lars observed one afternoon, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "A special woman, I think." "Very special," Cole agreed. "Then you build it right, with love in every board." Lars ran his hand along a door frame, checking its alignment. "This is good work, Mr. Maddox. She will be happy here." Cole certainly hoped so, because hidden in the back of his wardrobe, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, was the ring he'd purchased in Cheney. Simple but elegant, a gold band set with a small diamond that had cost him nearly everything he'd made from selling those steers. The jeweler had assured him it was a quality stone, and Cole had believed him because it caught the light in a way that reminded him of Riley's eyes. He visited town as regularly as he could manage, though the construction kept him busier than usual. Riley accepted his absences with good grace, though he could see the questions in her eyes every time he arrived, covered in dust and obviously exhausted. "You're working yourself too hard," she scolded one evening as they sat on her porch, his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair. "Whatever you're doing, it's not worth making yourself sick over." "It's worth it," Cole insisted. "I promise, Riley. Just a little longer." She bent to kiss him, soft and sweet. "I'm holding you to that promise, Cowboy." The construction took exactly 5 weeks from start to finish. When Lars pronounced the work complete and accepted his final payment, Cole stood in the middle of his expanded cabin and felt something close to pride. The space still smelled of fresh-cut pine and new paint, but it was solid and well-built and ready to become a home. He spent an entire day cleaning obsessively, removing every trace of construction dust, arranging furniture he'd built or purchased, hanging curtains that Riley's friend from the dry goods store had helped him select. When he was finished, the cabin looked nothing like the bachelor quarters it had been just weeks ago. Now it looked like a place where two people could build a life together. Cole rode into town the next day dressed in his best clothes, the ring box a solid weight in his vest pocket. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tied Jupiter outside Monroe's store and pushed through the door. Riley was helping a customer, old Mrs. Henderson, who seemed to have a million questions about thread, and Cole waited as patiently as he could manage. When the elderly woman finally made her selection and departed, Riley turned to him with a smile that faltered when she saw his expression. "What's wrong? You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually." Cole took her hands, feeling them tremble slightly in his grip. Or maybe that was his own trembling. "Riley, can you close the store? I need to take you somewhere." "Now? It's the middle of the afternoon. Please, it's important." Something in his voice must have convinced her because Riley flipped the sign to closed and grabbed her shawl. "This better be good, Maddox. I'm losing business hours here." "It's good, I promise." They rode out of town together, Riley on Juniper beside Cole on Jupiter, heading north toward his ranch. She peppered him with questions the entire way, but Cole deflected them all with increasing nervousness. What if she didn't like what he'd built? What if his vision of their future didn't match hers? What if he'd misread everything and she wasn't ready for this step? By the time they reached his property, his hands were sweating and his mouth had gone dry. "Why are we at your ranch?" Riley asked as they approached the cabin. Then she stopped, staring. "Cole, what did you do?" The cabin was clearly larger than it had been, the new construction obvious even to a casual observer. But it was more than that. There were flower boxes under the windows now, filled with late-season blooms Cole had transplanted from a meadow. The door had been painted a welcoming blue. Smoke curled from the chimney because Cole had started a fire that morning to take the chill off. It looked like a home. That's what he'd been going for, and from Riley's stunned expression, he'd succeeded. "Come inside," Cole said, dismounting and helping her down from Juniper. "Please." But he led her through the door, watching her face as she took in the changes. The expanded kitchen with its new stove and spacious table. The sitting room with comfortable chairs positioned to catch the morning light. And through the open doorway, visible but not intrusive, the new bedroom with its handmade bed frame and colorful quilt. Riley walked through the space slowly, running her hands over surfaces, examining details, saying nothing. Cole's heart sank with each passing moment of silence. "If you don't like it, I can change things," he said desperately. "The furniture can be moved, the colors repainted. I thought, it's perfect," Riley interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Cole, it's absolutely perfect." Relief flooded through him so powerfully, his knees went weak. "You really think so?" "I think you've built a home. Our home." She crossed to him, taking his hands. "This is what you've been doing all these weeks, building this for us?" "I wanted to have something to offer you. More than just a bachelor's cabin and a promise. I wanted you to see what our life could look like, what I'm prepared to build for you. With you." Cole pulled her toward the sitting room, positioning them in front of the east-facing windows where afternoon light painted everything gold. "Riley Monroe, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You've changed everything for me, made me believe in partnership and trust and the possibility of happiness again." He released her hands and dropped to one knee, pulling the ring box from his pocket. Riley's hands flew to her mouth, more tears spilling over. "I'm not perfect," Cole continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll probably be overprotective sometimes. I'll work too hard. I'll forget that you're perfectly capable of handling things yourself. But I promise to always see you as my equal, to respect your independence and support your dreams, to build a life with you, not for you." He opened the box, revealing the ring. Riley Monroe, will you marry me? Will you make this house a home? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you took the reins from my hands that day in the livery? Yes. The word came out choked with happy tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes. Cole's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and then Riley was pulling him to his feet, kissing him with a passion that made his head spin. They held each other in the golden afternoon light, both laughing and crying, overcome by the magnitude of what they'd just promised each other. I can't believe you built all this, Riley said when they finally broke apart, both breathless. How did you manage it? The time? The cost? I sold some steers, hired Lars from Cheney to help with the skilled work. Spent every spare moment I had hammering and sawing and painting. Cole gestured around the room. I wanted you to know I'm serious about this, about us, about building a real life together. As if I had any doubts after these past 3 months. Riley held up her hand, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. It's beautiful, Cole. Everything is beautiful. They spent the next hour exploring the additions together, Riley exclaiming over details Cole had worried were too simple or not elegant enough. She loved the flower boxes, loved the spacious kitchen, loved the way the bedroom was positioned to catch the sunrise. We could move your bed from town, Cole suggested, and any furniture you want to keep from your apartment. Make this space truly ours instead of just mine. I'd like that. Riley ran her hand along the new table, her expression thoughtful. What about the store? We haven't really talked about what happens to it after we marry. That's your decision. If you want to keep running it, we'll figure out how to make that work. If you want to sell it and focus on the ranch, that's fine too. Or maybe there's some combination, deliveries to homesteads a few days a month, someone else managing day-to-day operations. Cole took her hand. I meant what I said, Riley. I'm not going to make decisions about your life without you. We're partners. Partners, Riley repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. And I think I'd like to keep the store, at least for now. Maybe hire someone to help manage it so I'm not tied to the counter every day. I enjoy the business side, connecting with customers, managing inventory, the challenge of making it profitable. Then that's what we'll do. Cole pulled her close. When should we marry? I know traditionally there should be a longer engagement, but I'm not feeling particularly traditional at the moment. Riley laughed against his chest. Neither am I. What about 3 months? That gives us time to plan a proper ceremony, for me to arrange things with the store, for you to finish any last preparations here. 3 months, Cole did the mental calculation. That would be December, a winter wedding. Is that all right? I know it's not the most romantic season. It's perfect. Everything about this is perfect. He kissed the top of her head. Though we should probably tell people soon, Mrs. Fletcher will be insufferable if she finds out from someone else. They rode back to town as the sun was setting, both glowing with happiness that was impossible to hide. They went straight to the boarding house, where Mrs. Fletcher answered their knock with curiosity written all over her face. Mr. Maddox, Miss Monroe, what brings you both here at this hour? We have news, Riley said, holding up her left hand to display the ring. Cole and I are engaged. We'll be married this December. Mrs. Fletcher's shriek of delight probably woke half the boarding house. Within minutes, she'd gathered every resident she could find, and Cole found himself shaking hands and accepting congratulations while Riley was pulled into excited conversations about wedding plans. The news spread through Spokane Falls like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in town knew that the rancher and the storekeeper were officially engaged. Some people were genuinely happy for them, others remained skeptical, but most seemed willing to accept that the match was happening whether they approved or not. Doc Patterson cornered Cole at the general store, a knowing smile on his weathered face. Knew it would come to this the moment I saw you two together in my back room. You're good for each other, Maddox. Don't mess it up. I'll do my best not to. See that you do. Riley's one of the best things to happen to this town in years. We'd hate to lose her because you turned out to be an idiot. It was probably the closest thing to a blessing Cole was going to get from the old doctor, and he accepted it with grace. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Riley hired a young widow named Margaret to help manage the store, training her on inventory and customer service while gradually stepping back from daily operations. She also began moving her belongings to the ranch, slowly transforming Cole's bachelor quarters into a space that reflected both of them. Cole, meanwhile, worked on final improvements to the property. He built a proper barn to replace the aging structure that had served him for years, expanded the corral, and even constructed a small workshop where Riley could pursue the woodworking hobby she'd mentioned loving as a child. They also made several trips back to the homesteads Riley had visited during their original business partnership, both of them together this time. They brought wedding invitations, delivered supplies, and shared their news with families who'd become customers and friends. Frank and Martha Peterson were particularly delighted, Martha insisting on baking the wedding cake herself. The other homesteaders offered various contributions: fresh flowers, music for the reception, their best wishes for a long and happy marriage. As December approached and the wedding date drew near, Cole found himself increasingly grateful for the community that had formed around them. People who'd been skeptical of Riley's independence or suspicious of Cole's intentions had gradually come around, won over by the obvious strength of their partnership. The wedding took place on a surprisingly mild December afternoon, held in the small church where Cole and Riley had sat together every Sunday for months. The pews were packed with townspeople, ranchers, homesteaders, and friends from as far away as Cheney. Riley wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that her mother had sent from Oregon, a peace offering, perhaps, or an acknowledgement that Riley's choices had led to happiness. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style Cole had never seen before, and she carried a bouquet of winter evergreens and dried flowers. She was the most beautiful thing Cole had ever seen. As he stood at the altar watching her walk toward him, Cole's mind flashed back to that day in the livery. The day a woman with sharp blue eyes and capable hands had taken the reins from him and refused to let him suffer through his own stubbornness. The day his carefully ordered, deliberately solitary life had begun to crack open. He'd been so afraid then. Afraid of vulnerability, of trust, of letting anyone see past his defenses. And Riley had walked right through those defenses like they were paper, seeing him clearly and choosing him anyway. The minister began the ceremony, but Cole barely heard the words. He was too focused on Riley's face, on the love shining in her eyes, on the way her hand trembled slightly when he took it in his. "Do you, Cole Maddox, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The words came easily, without hesitation. "And do you, Riley Monroe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Riley's voice was steady and sure. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride." Cole cupped Riley's face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, pouring into it all the love and promise and hope he carried. The church erupted in applause and cheers, but Cole barely noticed. His entire world had narrowed to this moment, this woman, this life they were beginning together. The reception was held at the hotel, where tables had been pushed back to create space for dancing and celebrating. Martha Peterson's cake was magnificent, 3 tiers decorated with winter flowers made of frosting. There was music from a fiddle player who'd traveled from Cheney, food enough to feed everyone twice over, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Doc Patterson raised his glass and proclaimed that he'd known from the start they were perfect for each other, conveniently forgetting his initial skepticism. Mrs. Fletcher dabbed at her eyes and announced that she'd never seen a more devoted couple. Even Bill Henderson admitted that maybe independent women weren't so bad after all, especially ones who could handle cattle as well as account books. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, Cole pulled Riley onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. They moved together easily, naturally, their bodies knowing each other's rhythms after months of working side by side. "Happy?" Cole asked, his lips close to her ear. "Deliriously happy." Riley tilted her head back to look at him. "Though I suspect that has more to do with the man I married than the party." I could say the same thing, though I have to admit Margaret did an impressive job with the decorations. "She's been wonderful. I couldn't have managed everything without her help." Riley's expression grew serious. "Cole, I know we've talked about this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for letting me keep the store, for supporting my work, even though it would be easier for you if I just focused on the ranch." "Riley, you don't need to thank me for respecting your choices. That's the bare minimum of partnership." Cole spun her gently, drawing her back close. Besides, I'm selfish. I like that you're happy, that you're challenged, that you get to use all that brilliant business sense. A bored Riley would be a dangerous Riley. She laughed, the sound bright and joyful. You're probably right about that. They danced until Cole's still healing ribs protested the movement, then stood on the sidelines watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. Frank Peterson attempted an enthusiastic polka with his wife. Doc Patterson scandalized everyone by dancing with the young schoolteacher, and Mrs. Fletcher held court in the corner, no doubt already composing the gossip she'd share for weeks to come. As midnight approached, Cole and Riley finally made their escape, slipping out of the hotel and into the wagon Cole had prepared earlier. They drove through the quiet streets of Spokane Falls, both exhausted but too energized to feel it, heading north toward the ranch that was now truly their home. I can't believe we're married, Riley said, leaning against Cole's shoulder. This morning I woke up as Riley Monroe, and now I'm Riley Maddox. How does it feel? Right. Terrifyingly right, in a way I didn't expect. She looked up at him. Is that strange, to feel like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be? Not strange at all. I feel the same way. Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. Like everything in my life led to this moment. Like all the pain and mistakes and fear were worth it, because they brought me to you. They reached the ranch as stars wheeled overhead in brilliant patterns, the cabin warm and welcoming with light glowing from its windows. Cole had left a fire burning in the stove before they departed that morning, and he'd arranged for one of the neighboring ranch hands to make sure it stayed lit throughout the day. He helped Riley down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her over the threshold. She laughed and protested that it was unnecessary, but Cole could see the pleasure in her eyes. Humor me, he said. I've been waiting my entire life to carry my wife into our home. Let me have this moment. All right, Cowboy, but don't throw out your back. I need you functional for ranch work. Cole carried her through the sitting room and into their bedroom, setting her gently on the bed they'd share for the rest of their lives. The room was lit with candles he'd arranged earlier, their warm glow making everything soft and golden. You're quite the romantic when you want to be, Riley observed, looking around with obvious delight. Only for you. Cole sat beside her, taking her hand and running his thumb over the wedding band that now accompanied her engagement ring. Riley Maddox. I like the sound of that. So do I. She leaned into him, and they sat together in comfortable silence, letting the magnitude of the day settle over them. Cole? Do you remember what you said to me in the cave during that storm, about being tired of protecting yourself from something that might never happen? I remember. I'm glad you stopped protecting yourself. I'm glad you took the risk. Riley turned to face him fully. Because you were absolutely worth the risk, Cole Maddox. You're worth everything. Cole kissed her then, deep and thorough, and the candles burned low as they explored this new dimension of their partnership. They'd been building toward this moment for months, through trust earned and fears overcome, through honest conversations and shared work, through the slow revelation of two people learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that partnership could be strength. The months that followed their wedding were full of adjustment and discovery. Riley split her time between the store and the ranch, gradually trusting Margaret with more responsibility while maintaining her role in the business she'd built. Cole discovered that having a partner made ranch work both easier and more enjoyable, and that Riley's strategic mind was an asset when planning improvements or solving problems. They developed routines and rhythms, learned each other's habits and preferences, navigated the inevitable small conflicts that arose when two independent people tried to build a shared life. Sometimes Riley's need for order clashed with Cole's more relaxed approach. Sometimes Cole's protective instincts triggered Riley's fierce independence. But they talked through every issue, refusing to let resentments fester, always coming back to the foundation of respect and love they'd established. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Riley discovered she was pregnant just as the first wildflowers began blooming in the meadows. Cole's reaction, equal parts terrified and elated, made her laugh until she cried. You handle cattle and horses without batting an eye, but the thought of a baby makes you panic? She teased. Babies are more fragile than cattle, Cole protested, and they can't tell you what's wrong when something bothers them. We'll figure it out together, just like everything else. And they did. When Riley's pregnancy made riding difficult, Cole took over more of the ranch work while she focused on the store and managing their household. When Cole worried obsessively about her health, Riley reminded him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she was perfectly capable of handling it. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the entire ranch. Cole held his newborn child with shaking hands, marveling at her tiny fingers and perfect features, completely undone by the magnitude of what he and Riley had created together. "What should we name her?" Riley asked from the bed, exhausted but radiant. Cole thought for a long moment, then smiled. "What about Sarah? After my grandmother, not the other one. My grandmother was strong and kind and didn't take nonsense from anyone. She would have liked you." "Sarah Maddox." Riley tested the name, then nodded. "It's perfect." They raised their daughter with the same partnership they brought to everything else. Cole changed diapers and walked the floor with a colicky baby at 3 in the morning. Riley taught Sarah to read by the time she was 4 and took her on delivery runs once she was old enough to sit a horse. They showed her by example what it meant to be equals, to respect each other's strengths, to build something together that was greater than what either could accomplish alone. More children followed, a son named William, then another daughter they called Rose. The cabin they'd expanded for 2 people somehow accommodated 5, full of noise and laughter and the chaotic joy of family life. Riley eventually sold the store to Margaret, who'd proven herself more than capable of managing it independently. But Riley maintained her delivery routes, taking supplies to remote homesteads a few times each month, often bringing the children along to teach them about business and independence and the importance of serving their community. Cole expanded the ranch gradually, hiring reliable hands as the operation grew, but never so much that it stopped being a family business. He taught his son and daughters to work cattle, to read the weather, to understand the land and respect its rhythms. But more importantly, he taught them by example how to treat partners with respect, how to value competence over gender, how to build lives based on choice rather than expectation. Years passed. Sarah grew into a young woman who combined her mother's sharp mind with her father's steady determination. She announced at 16 that she intended to study business in Portland, and both her parents supported the decision without hesitation. William proved to have a gift for working with animals and took over more of the ranch operations as Cole aged. Rose discovered a talent for painting and filled the house with her artwork. Through it all, Cole and Riley's partnership remained the foundation of everything. They still worked side by side, still talked through problems and celebrated victories together, still found moments to steal away from children and responsibilities to remember why they'd chosen each other. On their 20th anniversary, Cole took Riley back to the ridge where he'd first seriously considered proposing, where he'd imagined what their life might look like. They sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, their hands intertwined, their bodies comfortable with decades of familiarity. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked. "Choosing this life instead of staying independent, answering to no one but yourself?" Riley was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No, never. Because this isn't me giving up my independence, Cole. It's me choosing to be independent with a partner who supports that independence. There's a difference. I hope I've lived up to that, to being the partner you deserved." "You have, every single day." Riley squeezed his hand. "We've built something remarkable, you and I. Not just this ranch or our children, but a life based on genuine partnership. That's rarer than you might think." Cole pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. 20 years since that day in the livery when she'd taken his reins and refused to let him be stubborn about his own need. 20 years of partnership and love and building something neither of them could have created alone. "Do you remember what you said to me in the cave?" Riley asked. "About being tired of being scared?" "I remember everything about that night." "I'm glad you stopped being scared. I'm glad we both did." She tilted her head up to look at him. "Because look what we built by being brave." Cole looked out over the ranch they'd expanded together, thought about the children they'd raised and the life they'd created, and felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. Riley was right. This was what happened when 2 people stopped protecting themselves from possibility and started building toward it instead. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, Cole could hear his son calling the cattle in for the evening, his daughter's laughter floating from the house, the familiar sounds of home and family and a life well lived. He'd been a cowboy with a broken rib who could barely saddle his own horse. She'd been a woman determined to build something on her own terms. Together they'd become more than either had imagined possible, true partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy that would outlast them both. And long after they were gone, people in Spokane Falls still told the story of the stubborn rancher and the independent storekeeper who'd found each other at exactly the right moment when both were brave enough to take the reins of their own happiness and ride toward a future they built together. It was a good story, a true story, the kind of story that proved sometimes the best things in life came from taking risks, letting walls crumble, and trusting that the person reaching for your hand would hold it steady through every storm and every triumph that followed. Cole and Riley Maddox lived that truth every day of their long, happy marriage, and their children and grandchildren carried it forward, proof that real partnership based on respect, equality, and genuine love could not only survive but thrive in even the harshest frontier. And it all started the day a woman took the reins from a cowboy too injured to ride, and neither of them let go.